On this show, we'll introduce you to Bryant Kern with the Keeper Ranch. Bryant's been a long-time deer farmer, but recently they discovered that fallow deer farming is incredibly profitable. On this video, I'll be interviewing Bryant and we'll share information why fallow deer farming is so much more profitable to the Keeper Ranch than whitetail deer farming. This is going to blow your mind. Especially if you're a whitetail deer breeder, this blew my mind. Tell them what one of your breeder bucks would sell for.
So when we first started out 3 years ago, a lot of our stuff was 10, 20 grand, and that was for a good breeder. Today's market right now, it's anywhere from 25 grand to $200,000.
$200,000 for one deer. Okay, and we're going to tell you why. Okay, the demand is there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about genetics and how genetics play a role, because when you hear a breeder buck up to $200,000, you think, how in the world? What drives that? Well, demand and supply, okay, but also genetics. So talk about genetics.
Yeah, so I mean, right now, obviously with the fallow, again, it's not a new industry, but there's a lot of big fallow out there right now, and the biggest push is let's breed the biggest fallow we can find. And as far as genetics go, you know, just trying to match up what you can. Again, fairly new, where you're talking 1 or 2 generations, but when you got somebody like Bullwinkle's mom or Avenger's mom, you can go ahead and match that up with something that you want to breed that look to. A lot of our stuff is out of Thunderstruck. Bullwinkle's mom pretty well consistently gets Thunderstruck in her just because we want that breeding.
What is it that makes the fallow deer so interesting now, and why are so many people getting into it?
I think the first reason is CWD and EHD resistance. You know, fallow deer, it's never been found to have CWD as well as EHD. Another big thing is that these guys can get raised in smaller pastures.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's talk about disease first off. Okay, on this video, we're going to talk about disease resistance, and we're going to talk about the hardiness of fallow deer, because the fallow deer's got so many positives going for itself. But the number one thing when he's talking about disease resistance, that really is the number one thing.
Yeah, it's disease resistance, not just to CWD and EHD. It's pretty well everything. You know, year in and year out, I shoot 1 dart a year, probably, on average, for a sick animal.
That's it?
And that's it.
Okay, so on this video, we're going to talk to you about the similarities between whitetail deer farming and fallow deer, and we're going to talk to you about the differences, because there are a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences. So lifestyle is one of the big reasons why I think people get into deer farming, but hey, you have to consider that we all have to make a living. And so when you start looking at deer farming opportunities, there's different species that you could consider doing, but without a doubt, in my opinion, the fallow deer are where most of the people are moving right now, and there's a good reason why. It's called for the money. So one of the biggest expenses in any deer farming operation is going to be feed. I mean, we spend a ton of money on feed on whitetail deer, and no matter what kind of feed you feed them, you know there can be disagreements that this feed is better than this feed, but you want to feed them a good feed, and you want to feed them a lot. Fallow deer, the expense that you will have with fallow deer compared to whitetail deer or elk is amazing. You'll be spending 25% of the amount of money that you're spending on a whitetail deer on a fallow deer. Tell them about that.
Yeah, so on average, our females, they get about 1 pound of protein a day. And as you know right now, some of the whitetail bucks, they're eating 4 pounds a day pretty easily, steadily.
Or up.
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
So you're saving a substantial amount of money just on the feed bill right there. Plus, fallow deer are grazers. I mean, you know, they're going to go out, they can eat grass, and whitetail deer are kind of nibblers. They'll go out on that grass and nibble on it and find the weeds in there and eat it. But the fallow deer, they can make a living just about anywhere.
Yeah, and I know a lot of operations with a good enough grass, you don't even have to feed them that protein. It just depends on what your ground can do for you.
Okay, so let's talk about we're in Texas, okay, and Texas has got a lot of exotic animals out there. And some of these ranches have got fallow deer on them, wild fallow deer on them. It is legal at this time to go out there and capture those wild fallow deer and put them in a pen and have your own breeding program. And you may be wondering, well, how do you go about doing that? Well, my advice would be, once you get them in a pen, you're gonna need to find out who they are. Okay, so I would take a DNA sample, I would send that to the registry, and I would make doggone sure that you got a pedigree on it. The pedigree is going to be blank.
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere. We started somewhere in the whitetail world, and now you can take a look at one of your deer here, whitetail deer here at Keeper, and the pedigree is long and deep and wide. I mean, it's full. You're not going to have that if you go out and capture a fallow deer from the wild, but it's perfectly legal to do that at this time. You got to start somewhere, so you get the pedigree on that, then you breed it to a bullwinkle or to a thunderstruck, and then you get the pedigree on that offspring, and then you get the pedigree on the next offspring, and you start stacking that pedigree back with proven genetics.
Yeah.
And that's how you grow these big deer.
Yep.
So tell me what's going on as far as construction-wise out here.
So we got a whole lot of construction going on, being a new property and trying to get everything set up. So right now we have our whitetail facility, and then also in a separate facility is our fallow, along with an equipment building. We also have a hay barn that we've built, and many more projects to come.
Well, everywhere you look out here, there's something being done. I mean, there's guys working, and as you build a deer farm, one thing is I tell people, look, you better have a business plan.
Yeah.
I mean, you better have a business plan, because these deer are going to multiply quickly, and you're going to need to have places to put these deer when they multiply if you don't sell them. And I noticed at your whitetail facility, what I like about this at Keeper is the whitetails are over there, and the fallow deer are over here.
Yep. We decided to go ahead and move properties this last year. A big part of the reason was getting back to my boss's family roots. You know, his grandparents used to own property here right about 5 miles away from here, and he kind of wanted to get back to that. And here on the property of 1,900 acres, we have 17 whitetail breeding pens and also 11 fallow breeding pens, and between the two is about 50 acres along with a kudu breeding operation.
Color, okay? I mean, let's talk about color. You know, I look at it, you've got chocolate, and spotted, and white. Is there one more valuable than the other?
I don't think there's one that's really more valuable than the other, but there's people that have their favorites. There's people that have their own, you know, white breeding program or chocolate breeding program. The spotted, it's kind of the most prominent from what I've seen. And so a lot of people, it's just their personal preference.
Does one get bigger than the other?
I haven't seen a whole lot of big whites, but not a whole lot of people are breeding whites.
The demand for any color right now is big. But when you talk about colors, let's go to whitetail deer. Most whitetail deer are brown, okay? But we've shown you on our television show, we've shown you that there's an occasional piebald, multicolored deer. There's an occasional white deer, okay? And a lot of breeders deliberately breed to get that piebald or that whitetail deer because it's a novelty. They want that. Their customers want that. And so when it comes to trying to deliberately breed on the whitetail side for a certain color, can you deliberately breed on the fallow side for a certain color?
Yeah, it's not 100%, but if you breed a chocolate to a chocolate, more than likely you're going to get a chocolate, and the same goes for a white.
So who's that buck right there, that big spotted one right there? Who is he?
That's Blades at 4 this year. So he's going to be thunderstruck on Bullwinkle's mom.
Okay. And he's 4?
Yep.
How much do you think he weighs right now?
Oh, he's a good 250 pounds.
Yeah, he's a
300.
pig. He's a pig. They're all in great shape. And what amazes me that they get that big with so much less feed than a whitetail deer.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about fawning. Whitetail deer, for the most part, are going to have 2 fawns when they're mature, 2 or more. Okay?
Yeah.
Breeding facilities, I mean, it's not uncommon to have triplets and sometimes quads. We don't want to really see that, but we get that. Fallow deer, tell everybody what they can expect as far as number of offspring out of a fallow doe.
99.9% of the time, it's going to be a single. The few times that I've had twins, most of the time one of them doesn't make it and the other one does survive. But ultimately, you get 1 fawn and 1 fawn survives.
See, and I want to point that out. You know, with the whitetail deer, you're going to get multiple fawns, but typically one survives. I mean, on the average.
Yeah.
You want them both to survive, or all three of them to survive, but you've got a tremendous death loss on the whitetail fawn side, where that death loss doesn't even occur on the fallow side.
Yeah.
I guess over the years I've raised thousands of whitetail deer, and I can tell you, I mean, I haven't had everything happen yet, but I've had my fair share of things happen, and whitetail deer are pretty hard to raise. I travel all over the country doing our television show and featuring all these whitetail deer farms, and I try to take a little bit of information from everybody, and whitetails are just hard to raise. Fallow deer aren't. Why are they so hardy?
Honestly, I don't know if it's just because they are an exotic deer species or what it is about them, but for whatever reason they just are. They don't require the everyday go out and look at them twice a day like a whitetail does. Heck, sometimes you could probably leave them for a week and just make sure they got feed and they'd be good to go. They're just naturally very hardy, never get any disease. I worm mine every now and again, and that's pretty much it.
The cool thing about it is, like in New Zealand, fallow deer are huge in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Okay. And they've got some really big fallow deer in New Zealand. But the fallow deer not just do well here in Texas, they do well all over in different kind of climates. I know that we just left a place up in Kentucky that had a nice bunch of fallow deer. There are people in Oregon, there are people all over the country that are raising fallow deer. And one of the cool things about fallow deer is they're not regulated like whitetail deer are. I mean, and especially here in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And it's for that reason there's a lot of whitetail deer breeders that are getting now into the fallow deer, because the regulations are just, they're not there for the fallows. But when it comes to the fallow deer elsewhere, and you want to say move these deer, if somebody was in Louisiana, wanted to buy some fallow deer from Texas, how would they go about doing that?
A lot of times they need to get in contact with their state, whether it's Department of Ag or Texas Parks, similar to what that is, because depending on the state, some of them require TB brucellosis, some of them require a 5-year plus CWD status, even though these guys have never been found to get it. Just kind of all depends on the state, it varies.
Okay. So let's discuss what kind of ground somebody needs to have to be able to raise fallow deer or deer in general. I think the cool thing about deer farming, yes, is the lifestyle that we all have, but deer farms can be built on property that is marginal, I call it. So address that issue.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, they'll survive anywhere, so it doesn't matter what type of ground you got, they'll be fine on it, even if it's just pure rock. Pure rock, sand, we got a lot of that in Texas, and they do just fine.
Well, I also noticed that some of your pens are really big and they don't have a lot of shade in them. I mean, this particular pen that's got the bucks in it, I mean, the bucks are underneath the shade, obviously, but I mean, the does. There's some of these doe pens that have got all these fawns, they don't have a lot of shade. How do they do with that?
Oh, they do just fine. I mean, the biggest reason for our pens being like that is just that pasture for them to graze on. And, even with it getting up to 110 degrees down here, they do just fine. Just make sure they got some shade.
And whitetail deer could not live in the same conditions, I'll put it that way.
Yes.
I mean, whitetail deer are wimps compared to fallow deer. That's the best way to put it. So let's talk about handling fallow deer. I mean, literally, I've seen you walk up and touch them. I know they're very gentle, but many times you've got to go in and remove antlers off of them. Okay, so tell everybody about the process in doing that.
So generally every fall when they go hard antler, we're gonna go ahead and cut their antlers off. It's very similar to the process of doing it in the whitetail. We're gonna knock them down, sedate them, give them a few antibiotics just to be safe, and then just go ahead and cut that antler off, and that way we're keeping them protected. Fallow are very, very, very ruddy animals, and they like to fight a lot, and so that way our animals, they're protected all throughout that breeding season, and they also shed just fine when it comes to shedding.
Okay, well right now it's early August, and you can see some of the bucks are actually, I mean, it's bothersome when that velvet starts shedding off of them. They start shaking, they get very anxious, and you can just tell it. So I mean, cutting the antlers is literally right around the corner now, isn't it?
Yeah,
All right, something I want to point out, if you're a whitetail deer breeder, listen up. I think this is not going to surprise you once you hear it. But tell everybody about the different darts that you use. We call these remote drug delivery devices. That he has a dart gun, and if he's got a medicated whitetail deer or anything, he's got to send a dart with medication in it. He does it out of a dart gun. Okay, but the dart is different that you use on the fallow deer from the whitetail deer. Explain to them why.
So I first started out using 3/4 inch needles, just like I do in the whitetail. And a lot of my animals, it was taking them a long time to sedate. I just started thinking about it a little bit and kind of came up with the solution of a fallow. They have a fat thickness of about this much, whereas a whitetail has about that much. And so I went to an 1.25 inch needle, and ever since then, I mean, my animals, they're going down way faster. The sedation process, you know, they're actually truly falling asleep. They're not, you know, kicking around and doing stuff like that. That 1.25 inch needle, it's been a game changer for my fallow.
Good. So every one of the whitetail deer on every single deer farm that I've ever gone to, you know, has to have an ear tag with a unique number. That unique number is issued by the state. It stays with that deer from the time it is tagged as a fawn to death. That deer has got that number. And so fallow deer do not have that same requirement, okay? Yet every one of your fallow deer has a tag, and fawns have got tags. Tell everybody why.
I mean, that's just for our own personal identification purposes. Obviously, having all these animals registered and for their DNA, I need to be able to go out and say, hey, that's orange 11, not just, I don't know who her mom and dad is, you know. And so that's why we went ahead and tagged all of ours, is just for that identification, and to be able to tell, hey, this one's got this DNA and that's who it is right there.
Okay, as we look at these deer, okay, I think every one of them looks different. I mean, some of them got bigger palmations than others, and some of them got bigger fronts. I mean, really, what is it that somebody's looking for in a breeder deer?
Our own personal focus is that we want something that's forward facing, that when you look at that animal, you can see that palm going out like this. You can see all of its points, you can see the whole palm, whereas, you know, a natural fallow just kind of goes up, and it's got to turn,
very thin palms.
It's got to turn to the side in order for you to see what it actually has on top of its head. So that's our own personal goal, but we get breeders that come in and they're looking for, you know, something with a lot of points, or hey, I want the biggest palmed one you have in the pen. It just kind of all varies.
Like, okay, speaking of the big palm one, who is that right there?
So that buck is a game changer at 3, and so he's Blade's full brother. So
Okay.
Again, he's Thunderstruck on top of Bullwinkle's mom.
Well, we filmed him last year, didn't we?
Yep.
Wow. So what a difference between 2 years old and 3-year-old.
Yep.
Okay, so when do you see them maturing? I mean, when do they get the biggest?
A lot of times it's 5, 6 years old.
Okay, see, with the whitetail deer, I mean, in the whitetail deer farming world, we try to get them up to around 3 years old, to where we can get rid of them as stalkers. But in the breeding world, okay, again, this is a different world. The breeding world, you're seeing 5 to 6 years old before they really get mature.
Yep.
Okay. All right, I want to address deer density, whitetails versus fallow in the pen. But first off, I want to look at that guy over there.
Yeah.
He's going crazy. Tell everybody. Okay, again, this first part of August. If you don't know anything about deer, tell him what he's doing.
Yeah, he's stripping his velvet right now. He's shedding out. So they do that process about 3 to 4 weeks earlier than the whitetail do.
Okay, so we were talking about breeding time too. That the breeding, it seems like their cycle is about a month earlier.
Yep.
Okay, and let's talk about gestation period on the fallow deer versus a whitetail deer. Whitetail deer, people say 196 to 200 days from the time they're bred to the time that they have fawns. What is it for fallow?
It's about 230.
Really? So it's about 30 days?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
Good. So let's get on to talking about deer density compared fallow to whitetails.
So with the whitetails, you know, obviously less dense. I'm sure you've experienced this, less density in your pens, the better survivability you have with your fawns. The fallow, it doesn't make much of a difference.
Really?
I like to keep them where they have grass in their pens somewhat throughout the summer. You know, towards the end of summer, it's going to get a little thin. But other than that, I mean, you can have 40 or 50 of them in a 2.5 acre pen, and as long as they got grass, their fawns are doing just fine.
Fantastic. Okay, talk about breeding, okay, real quick. All right, breeding, I'm assuming all your does have been AI bred. You plan on doing that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the same way with any serious whitetail breeder. We AI everything. But then what we do is we put a cleanup buck in. Okay, so tell everybody about basically your success rate AIing and how that cleanup buck works.
First few years, it was a little rough. This year, we're right at about 50%. There's a couple other herds that have done 60 and 70. But you know, that cleanup buck, generally 14 days after our AI is done, we'll go ahead and put that cleanup buck in, and essentially every doe that's in there that didn't take to that AI process, they're gonna go ahead and breed them.
Okay.
So in 5 years with our fallow breeding operation, we just hope to keep getting bigger and better. You know, our operation is about at its max with 100 to 120 does, but we want to refine that to where year in and year out we're producing bucks like our current breeders. And then hopefully within that having one of the premier fallow hunting operations in the business. That's our ultimate goal. That's where we're headed, and hopefully within this next 5 years we can achieve that.
So the more I find out about fallow deer, and the more I travel around the country and I see all the people moving into the fallow deer industry, it makes me think, the growth in my deer herd is going to be more towards the fallow deer side now. And the reason why is because they're easy to raise, it doesn't cost as much to raise them, and it's a great financial reward. And if y'all want more information about the Keeper Ranch and specifically about the fallow deer program, give Bryant Kern a call.